Hello, Christopher Nickel here, and in this video we'll be looking at using the pen tool to create vector-based custom shapes. All those words may be very confusing right at first, but I promise you by the end of this video you'll have a good idea of what those terms mean and also how to go about creating these forms. So to begin with, I want to remind you of something that we learned earlier in this course, which is the use of the shape tool. The shape tool, if you will recall, is a way of creating editable vector-based forms. And right here, toward the bottom of our toolbar, you'll see the shape tool. It starts usually with the rectangle tool and the ellipse tool and making these sort of standard shapes. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I want to bring your attention to the custom shape tool because this will give us a bit of a preview of what we're dealing with. So I'm going to pick one here that's a fairly complicated shape, a lot of blobs. And I just want to look really quickly at how this shape is made. So if you go one tool up here, you'll see the selection tool, and there's a path selection tool and a direct selection tool. These interact with vector forms. The path selection tool allows you to click on the shape and it will highlight the entire shape and allow you to move it about. Whereas the direct selection tool actually allows you to click into that path and edit individual points. Now, what we're looking at here is a vector shape, and the vector shapes, if you will remember, are made up of curves, individual curves that are linked by these squares here, and those squares are anchor points where the curve changes direction. So you'll notice here along the outside of this sort of blob-like amoeba that every time from one point to another point you'll see an even shape of a curve, and whenever that curve changes dramatically, kind of at the apex of the curve as it were, you'll find one of these anchor points. Using this direct selection tool, I can actually select one of those points and move it around and change the positioning of the curve. In addition to changing the position of the anchor, I can also grab these little handlebars. These bars actually direct the curvature of the line, both in terms of the angle of the curve as I rotate it back and forth, as well as the intensity of it. So the further I pull it out, the bigger the curve becomes. You'll notice that as soon as I start really twisting it around, the curve becomes quite odd and really becomes knotted up and maybe doesn't do quite what I'm hoping for it to do. There is a way of using this creatively, but that can be a very difficult thing to do. I would also point out that since the curve is only going from one anchor point to the other, as I pull the intensity of the curve out, it starts getting a little bit weird around the previous anchor point. So there's kind of a domino effect, and you can come through and sort of even that out by realigning the curve on the adjacent anchor point as well as moving its position. But each point is connected to the one next to it, and so if you change one curve, you're going to affect the rest. So why are we looking at all this in the custom shape tool? Well, I want to show you a tool, the pen tool, that allows you to create these sorts of forms all on your own without having to use the custom shape tool, and there's plenty of times in which you'll want to do that. So you'll notice that as I use the path selection tool, I can select a path, I can grab it and move it around. Now, because these vector shapes are large in this, are just a series of lines connected to one another, they can be edited in any number of ways without affecting the quality. If I select my move tool with the transform controls box checked, I can actually change the size and shape of it. And again, since these aren't made up of pixels, I'm not blurring the image or degrading the quality of it all by doing this. In addition to changing the size and the shape, if I go ahead and have my selection tool selected and the layer that the shape is on highlighted, I can actually come in and change the fill, which again is the interior color, and the stroke, which is the exterior line, the outline of it. You can't really see the exterior of the line in my example here yet, but if I go ahead and slide this bar to make it thicker, you'll see I can go ahead and change that. So the great thing about these shapes, the vector shapes, is that I can go through, select a combination of colors for the path, again the outline, or the fill, again the color that is in the middle of the shape, move to another layer, do some editing, come back to it, decide I want to do something different, change the thickness of the stroke, come in, change the color of the fill, and I can continue to come through and edit these shapes indefinitely as long as I do not rasterize them. Sometimes you'll try to do something to a shape. It'll ask you, do you want to rasterize this layer? That is almost always the wrong answer. If they ask you to rasterize a vector shape, say no. That immediately eliminates your ability to edit them, and try to find another solution to what it is that you're trying to do. So to make these shapes yourself, I want to direct you to this tool here. This is called the pen tool. It's supposed to look like the tip to a fountain pen. And if I click on that, you'll see if I come into the document and just click down once, I create actually what is an anchor point, just like what we were looking at in the shape tool. If I click again, it'll create another anchor, and I can continue doing so. Indefinitely really, but until I come back to the original point. As you'll see, as I return the pen to the original point, I have a small circle that appears next to it. If I move away, you'll see that circle disappears, and it only appears when I'm back to the original point. When I bring it back to the original point, it completes the shape, and it finishes making it as a complete form. When I get to this stage, I can continue to edit these in the way that you saw me edit the custom shape, where I can go ahead and I can change the fill color, I can change the stroke color as freely as I like, and of course I can change the thickness of the stroke. The other thing that I can do is actually determine whether I want a solid line for a stroke or a dash or dotted line. There really are a lot of options up here that allow you to edit these shapes, the color and the appearance of them, in whichever way you choose. Now, just like the custom shape tool, I can make shapes, and I'm going to take my path selection tool here to move this guy over again. And you'll notice the layer order here determines what looks like it's above what. So if I change the layer order so that my yellow diamond is below my green blob, all of a sudden it looks like it is behind it in space. So remember, layer order in the layers panel determines how things appear to be stacked in space. The higher things look like they're on top, the lower things look like they're behind. So if you want to put something on top of something else, it's simply a matter of changing your layer order. So coming back to the pen tool, I'll point out that not only can I make one point and another and create a line, but if I hold down the click when making the second point, I can actually pull it out and create a curve. I can continue doing this repeatedly, and notice that I am pulling the curve out in the direction that I am moving the line. So the direction that I want to move the shape, the edge of the shape in, is the direction that I'll pull my curve out. And you'll see I'm not making huge adjustments to the curvature of the line. I'm really just trying to make it as gentle and smooth as possible. One other thing to point out that's important here, and if I'll use my direct selection tool so you can observe this, is as I'm pulling out the curvature points, you'll notice that they are basically balanced right at the tip of the curve, so that there's an equal distance under each side. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, when you're trying to trace a curve, you are trying to pick up an even balance from one side and the other. If you manage to succeed in doing this, you'll have the smoothest, roundest curves possible that look the most natural. So again, if I come back to my green blob shape and click on one of the forms here, you'll see a similar sort of situation holds true, where it's more or less even from one side or the other. Using this method, you can create a shape of a custom vector shape of any size and any shape that you wish. And of course, you can move it around just by using that path selection tool. You can use the move tool to make it larger and smaller, and if you want to make sure that it does not distort, hold down the shift key while you're making it larger and smaller here with your transform controls. And with those simple steps, you can go ahead and create anything that you want. Now, one other thing that it's really wonderful about this pen tool in creating custom shapes is I'd like to point out that each time I make a shape, it automatically makes its own layer, which is, of course, a really wonderful non-destructive editing property. Now, one other thing I'd like to point out about the pen tool here is in order to do what I'm doing, where I'm creating these shapes, you need to double check to make sure that this drop-down menu here is selected to shape. If it is on path, it'll make the line, but it won't be an editable line in the same way that the shape is. It won't have a stroke or a fill to it. So when you drop down this menu, make sure that it says that the shape option is checked before proceeding. If you are trying to make a shape and it's not coming out in the way that you expect, this is most likely the culprit. So what if you want to make a shape of an object, a real world object that you photographed, but you want to actually turn into one of these editable vector forms? Well, I'll give you an example of this. So I have a picture of a wrench here, and I'm going to make more or less a cartoon version of this wrench using Photoshop. So one thing I want to point out is in the process of doing this, what we're going to be doing is tracing this form. I'm going to set this fill to nothing. So this little symbol here, this white symbol with the red stripe through it, means empty. It means no fill. So as opposed to putting a color in the middle, it just won't put anything and you'll see right through it. The reason I do this is if you have it set to a fill, as you create a shape, it will be filling as you go, and it will in turn cover what it is that you're trying to shape, and make it very, very difficult to proceed with a line. The other thing that I like to do is select a color, a bright color for my path, which really allows me to see through contrast where my path is going, where my line is going. So the stroke should be a nice neon color. Remember, you can come back and change that after the fact. But if it's a good color that contrasts with the background, you'll easily be able to see what you're doing as you move along. So to make it easy on myself, I'm going to begin my shape along a straight line in the photograph. And I'm going to start my curves, one at the beginning of a curve, one in the middle of the curve, and one at the end of the curve. And I'm going to keep doing that for every single curve that I get. One of the skills that you will have to build in order to really get good with this tool is being able to analyze curves as you are trying to make them. Breaking a shape up into individual curves and being able to identify which curve starts where and where the next curve, where one curve ends and the next curve begins. So you'll see that I'm trying to really carefully pick the beginning, middle, and end of each curve. And you'll notice, for example, I've identified this as one curve, and then this sort of sharper curve here around the edge of the wrench as a separate one. Again, as I'm pulling my curves out, I'm always pulling in the direction that I am moving my line. So if I'm moving to the left, I am pulling my curve to the left. And again, I'm creating those curves by clicking and holding down on the click and then dragging it in the direction that the line is moving. So I'm clicking, holding, and dragging. This takes a good amount of control to really get to be precise, and that control really does take a significant amount of practice. So don't get frustrated if it doesn't come right off the bat, and understand that it is a skill that really comes with time spent with the tool, getting a feel for it, and really seeing how it responds to different situations. That practice, that getting used to it in different circumstances, is really what's going to build your eye in terms of breaking down curves, breaking down shapes into individual curves. So you can see I've finished my my form here, and I think it's looking pretty good. One thing that I would like to do is add this edge in, and you'll notice as I got back to the beginning, I got my little symbol with the round shape on I'll back up there so you can see it again. Where I bring my pen there, I have the little circle next to it, and so when I click it, it completes the shape, and now my line has stopped. For this case, I'm going to start a new line, and I actually don't want to make a fully described shape. I actually would just like a line that helps describe that edge. So once I finish with the line that I'd like to create, I'm just going to hit return, and that actually terminates the line before it is rounded into a full two-dimensional form. So I'm going to do the same thing on the side. I'm going to hit return, and now I just have a line described. Now at this point, I'm going to go back to my original shape. I'm going to remove the photograph, go back to my original shape. I'm going to change the fill to a nice steel gray. I'm going to change my stroke to a black outline, and then I'm going to change each of those small lines to a black stroke as well. And you'll notice I don't have a fill, and that's a moot point with these because there is no shape to fill. So you can see right off the bat there, very quickly, I was able to create the shape of the wrench. I'm actually looking at this, realizing that there's one more line that I would like to draw for this, and that would be this line here to really describe the back edge. Hit return of the wrench head. Hit return. And you know, why don't I just be thorough about it and draw on this oval as well. The more detail you can add, the more shapes you can trace, the richer and more detailed your cartoon will appear. So you'll notice that turning off and on the visibility of the layers really allows you to see through and see that that photograph again if you need to trace it. So one of the techniques here is really also thinking about how the layers stack on top of one another. Since this is my base color, I want this to be behind the other line. So I have it as the lowest level of all of my shapes here. So with this process, you're really building up shapes and lines on top of a background as you move up. So you have to really think about these forms as one thing covers another, which covers another, which covers another. If you were to be tracing a picture of something that had multiple details or multiple colors, you would be adding more and more layers on top of the other. Remember, as you stack the layers, the layer on top covers the layer below. So you don't have to trace just what's visible of what you determine is the background color, but you can trace out the entire thing and just allow the upper layers to cover it. One other thing that you have available to you here is, opposed to just having whatever's in the background of the thing that you're tracing, once you have your full traced out shape made, you can come in and put in a solid color background of whatever color you like. Let's make ours green. And that allows you to have a nice solid background that looks like a full out cartoon. Now the entire photograph is removed. You can just hide that layer. And you have a fully described shape here with a background behind it. You can put anything that you want in the background. You could put a different photograph. You could put a gradient layer. Any of those are available for you to utilize. I hope this demonstration has been useful for you in learning about custom shapes and using the pen tool to create your own custom shapes. You can save these shapes as independent individual files and then reopen them in any document you want, and you'll have a vector-based shape at your disposal. So you can really have a lot of fun with these, using them in many different creative applications. I hope you enjoy using this technique, and happy Photoshopping.